It doesn't start with a concussion, it starts with a bad mood, a forgotten word, a slammed door. Maybe it's a retired football player screaming at his kids, but breathing too loudly. Perhaps it's a 38-year-old army veteran staring at a wall for hours, forgetting why he ever walked into the room. Maybe it's the same man 2 weeks later, sobbing in the front seat of his car, gripping the steering wheel, unsure what to do over what's happening. This isn't stress, it's not burnout, it's not simply getting older, it's something else entirely. It's CTE, or chronic traumatic encephalopathy. You probably heard of it. Athletes, murders, suicides. That movie with Will Smith, perhaps. But what you think you know is merely the surface, because CTE isn't just about football, and it isn't just about dying. It's about everything that happened before. It is the slow, ugly unraveling of the mind while the body keeps on working, still picking up the kids and still pretending that nothing's wrong. That's the part that you don't hear about. What is CTE? So let's be clear right from the beginning. This isn't about one big hit. It's about many smaller hits, repeated blows to the head over years, sometimes decades. Now, not every hit causes a concussion, and that's actually part of the problem, because the damage, it builds up gradually, with protein, specifically tau protein, beginning to clump together in the brain. Now, this is similar to rust spreading through a circuit board. Too much rust, eventually you get a short circuit, and that's precisely what happens with this sort of head trauma rust. Symptoms may not appear for years or even decades, and when they do, they don't all emerge at once. Initially, there are mood swings, followed by forgetfulness. Over time, the condition worsens, leading to paranoia, rage, confusion. It's both shocking and painful to witness, compounded by the fact that CTE can't be definitively diagnosed until after death. As a result, those living with it often find themselves drifting, misdiagnosed, dismissed, or labeled as depressed, lazy, or just going through something. CTE wasn't a new disease when it was identified. It had long existed under other names. Boxers referred to it as being punch drunk, while doctors used the term dementia pugilistica. The symptoms, slurred speech, tremors, and memory loss had long been recognized, but the prevailing assumption was that these only affected boxers. A known cost of taking too many blows to the head over too long a time. Few looked beyond the ring, but that changed in 2002 when Dr. Bennett Amalu, a Nigerian-born forensic pathologist, performed an autopsy on Mike Webster. Webster had once anchored the Pittsburgh Steelers offensive line, but later ended up living in a truck, addicted to painkillers, paranoid, and broken. He died of a heart attack at the age of just 50. During his examination, Amalu found no signs of stroke, trauma, or any apparent cause in Webster's brain. However, under the microscope, he observed tau, misfolded, clumped, and massively pervasive. This discovery, it marked the first confirmed case of CTE. Now, at first, the NFL naturally rejected the filings, but Amalu kept going. He published, examined, and proved the pattern while others slowly followed. What began with one autopsy evolved into a mounting body of evidence. Repeated head trauma, regardless of severity, can produce long-term degeneration. Eventually, the NFL acknowledged the link. Yet the discovery wasn't the result of a league initiative or a medical commission. It came from a quiet lab and a pathologist who refused to look away. Not just football. Now, it's easy to pin this on American football. That's where the headlines and early cases emerged. But stopping there means you're missing the whole picture. So CTE is turned up in rugby players, in Australia, in the UK, professional wrestlers who spent years getting slammed headfirst into mats and chairs, hockey enforcers whose job was to hit and be hit, and even in football, as in soccer to our American friends. Players, especially defenders, who headed the ball thousands of times over their careers. Turns out that light thud when your forehead meets a ball, well, it all adds up. And it doesn't end with athletes. Military veterans are now showing CTE-like symptoms after years of exposure to blast waves from IEDs, grenades, or even repeated heavy weapons training. The trauma isn't caused by a single explosion. It results from the brain being shaken repeatedly. Then there's a group hardly ever discussed. Survivors of domestic violence. These individuals have endured years of head trauma behind closed doors, often remaining undocumented, untreated, and invisible. Some studies are now beginning to reveal similar patterns of long-term damage, yet there is barely any research funding or acknowledgement of their suffering. The point is that CTE isn't just a sports disease. It's a consequence of repetition, which opens the door to far more victims than most people realize. The hidden symptoms. Now look, everyone's aware of the big signs of CTE. Memory loss, depression, angry outbursts. But those are just the obvious ones. CTE doesn't stick to a script, and some of the symptoms can be stranger and more disturbing than most people ever imagine. Take impulse control. People who were once calm, measured, and maybe even gentle suddenly find themselves gambling away their savings, drinking themselves into blackouts, or blowing up over nothing. And when the dust settles, they either don't remember what set them off, or worse, they remember, they just can't explain why it happened. Then there are the personality shifts, which can be heartbreaking to discuss. Imagine watching someone you love slowly turning into someone else, a husband, a father, a friend, becoming cold, paranoid, and detached. They are not just angry, they're also unpredictable, as if a switch has been flipped inside them, transforming them into an entirely different person. Some of these people develop paranoia, delusions, even hallucinations. They begin to think that people are watching them, that their phones are bugs, that their own family is out to get them. These are not just bad moods, they're full-blown psychosis, which is terrifying for both them and everyone around them. And here's one thing that you don't hear much about: sexual dysfunction. We're talking about loss of libido, sudden compulsive behavior, inappropriate advances, or even complete emotional detachment. Some partners say it's like being in a relationship with a stranger who just no longer knows how to connect with them. And these symptoms, they don't follow a set timeline. They come, they go. They often overlap in ways that can be really confusing to the sufferer. Without a definitive checklist, many people spend years being misdiagnosed as bipolar, schizophrenic, borderline, or depressed. Yet beneath the surface, the damage is physical, it's real, and it's only getting worse. Families left in the wreckage. And it's not just the individual with CTE who suffers. Everyone around them does too. Wives, husbands, kids, parents, and friends all have to live with the fallout, the mood swings, the silence, the explosions. And the most heartbreaking part is that many don't realize what's happening until it's too late. Families talk about walking on eggshells, never knowing which version of their loved one will walk through the door. Some nights they're distant, other nights they're shouting at shadows. And when things go really wrong, when someone lashes out, breaks down, or disappears for days, there's just no manual for this kind of thing. People are often quickly labeled as domestic abusers or addicts, which naturally tends to push them to the margins of society, and of course, just makes everything worse. Many partners end up blaming themselves. They wonder if it's them, or perhaps they're not doing enough. Maybe love, patience, therapy can fix it. But when it doesn't, they don't just lose a relationship. They lose the person, bit by bit, month by month. Some families are left behind entirely. Divorces happen, friendships vanish, kids cut contact, and by the time the autopsy finally reveals CTE, all that pain suddenly takes on a kind of awful clarity. Yet it doesn't make it any easier. This isn't just a brain condition, it's a wrecking ball, and the people closest to it are often the ones who get crushed the hardest. The worst stories. So many stories of CTE remain buried, not because they lack significance, but because they aren't accompanied by celebrity or spectacle. We tend to focus on the worst cases, and it is in these instances that things become especially dark. Aaron Hernandez was once a rising star for the New England Patriots, but in 2015, he was convicted of murder. 2 years later, he died by suicide in prison at the age of 27. His autopsy revealed stage 3 CTE, severe and widespread damage, particularly affecting areas responsible for judgment, impulse control, and emotional regulation. He was violent. Yeah, but his brain had begun to break down long before the trial began. Keith Titmus collapsed during training and died of heat stroke. He was a 20-year-old Australian rules footballer with no recorded concussions and no outward signs of trauma. However, the autopsy told a different story: stage 2 CTE. He became the youngest diagnosed case in Australian sport. His death shook the system, proving that the disease doesn't need decades to take hold. Just needs repetition. A former English rugby player, Steve Thompson, won the World Cup in 2003. He lifted the trophy and celebrated with his country. But today, he doesn't remember any of it. Diagnosed with early onset dementia and probable CTE, Thompson has even forgotten the names of his own children. He's still in the fight, but these days it's for accountability rather than trophies. Jovan Belcher's story is one of the worst. On the 1st of December 2012, he shot and killed his girlfriend, then drove to the team facility and committed suicide in front of his coach and general manager. He was 25 years old. An autopsy followed, and no prizes for guessing another CTE diagnosis. And look, this isn't just a men's issue. While CTE has long been linked to male athletes, the picture is changing. Cases in women are rising, especially among rugby and football players, as well as survivors of long-term domestic violence. The pattern remains consistent. Repeated impacts, not necessarily concussions, but frequent enough to trigger a similar quiet breakdown. Heather Anderson, an Australian rules footballer, died in 2022. After her death, doctors diagnosed her with CTE, the first confirmed case in an Australian female athlete. Since then, others have followed. Emerging research suggests that women may experience more severe symptoms than men following head trauma, possibly due to differences in hormones or neck structure. However, the science is still in the early stages. Most studies are focused on male football players, leaving female outcomes largely unexamined. And that is the risk. As more women enter high-contact sports and more survivors of violence begin to speak out, the long-term consequences of head trauma are becoming impossible to ignore. Yet in many homes, hospitals and courts, CTE remains unnamed, just another injury, unseen, untreated, unspoken. Why we still don't know enough. With our current understanding, you'd think the situation would be improving, but it's not. Not really. Since CTE can only be diagnosed after death, most people are left without answers or treatment plans, only a growing pile of symptoms that don't make sense. Even then, most doctors still won't consider CTE unless you've worn a helmet professionally. The NFL, along with the NHL, boxing commissions, and college programs, avoided discussing the issue for years. When the first significant studies emerged, the findings were either denied, dismissed, or ignored. Settlement payouts and PR campaigns eventually followed, but by then, the damage had been done. This pervasive silence has trickled down through the ranks. High school athletes still endure thousands of hits each year, and youth leagues often lack proper protocols. Most parents remain unaware of second impact syndrome, a serious condition that occurs when a second head injury happens before recovery from a previous one, while many coaches refuse to bench their best players during playoffs. The situation is actually even worse outside the realm of sports. Research funding for domestic violence survivors or military veterans suffering from blast injuries is nearly non-existent. And if you're not in the US, well, good luck finding a specialist who knows what to look for. We still don't know how many people are currently exhibiting the early signs of CTE, but the number is almost certainly much higher than we think. The science is still catching up. Now, for something so destructive, CTE remains shrouded in mystery. We don't know how many hits are too many. We don't understand why some athletes develop it while others playing the same sport in the same position for the same number of years don't. And we still don't know how to stop it once it begins. There's research underway. Boston University is at the forefront of efforts to collect brains, track patterns, and draw clearer connections. The science is progressing, but not as quickly as the game or the culture surrounding it. A major obstacle to change is social and political. Imagine the father of a promising 14-year-old linebacker. For the sake of argument, let's say he lives in a small Texas town with limited opportunities. He played football, his dad played football, and even his grandfather did. He lives and breathes the game, dreaming of the day that his son will step onto an NFL field. Now, there's some fancy new research coming out of some fancy liberal university that's telling everybody that the game he loves is dangerous. You're probably beginning to see the problem. Sports and their cultures run deep in many people's lives, and the idea of drastically altering rules or even choosing not to do something because of a possibility seems just outrageous to some. Of course, it doesn't help when a father can simply say, "Well, I played it for 15 years, and I'm fine." Every breakthrough in understanding CTE tends to collide with lawsuits, league statements, skeptical physicians, and a public unsure whether to look away or confront what's coming. Youth leagues hesitate for fear of scaring off players, while colleges work hard to avoid negative headlines. Interestingly, a concussion lawsuit is currently pending in British courts. Although it doesn't directly mention CTE, the case claims that the British Rugby League Association failed to provide proper protection, allegedly leading to conditions such as motor neuron disease, Parkinson's, and Alzheimer's. This lawsuit is seen as a litmus test for how the courts will react to claims brought by former sports players against their employers and leagues. Over in the United States, you may have heard that the NFL recently agreed to settle a lawsuit brought by over 4,500 former players who claimed the league ignored the real dangers of CTE. The payout was a pretty hefty $765 million, and that money was meant to help cover treatment for players dealing with dementia, CTE, and other brain-related conditions resulting from years of head injuries on the field. However, a recent investigation by the Washington Post indicates that the NFL hasn't exactly followed through. The report found that the league has been using medical technicalities to dodge payouts, sidestepping responsibility through loopholes and red tape. The truth is that the NFL's actual cost would be astonishing if they were to make real, genuine payouts to every player exhibiting these conditions. And you can bet that they're going to do everything they can to avoid that situation, allegedly. CTE is an absolute horror that we still know next to nothing about. But one thing is absolutely clear. When we start piecing together the puzzle, you can bet that the larger organizations profiting from people colliding will do everything they can to tear it all apart again. The dark monster of CTE is rapidly growing, but society not quite yet ready to fully acknowledge it. Thank you for watching.